Good morning, Ed. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good, Brent. Very much having a great day already.
Thank you for being here on such short notice and so early today. Apologize that we got a little late starting today, but joining me we have some members from the Virtual Society for Historical Preservation.
Oh, okay.
Looks like some members located on the West Coast, some on the East Coast.
Okay, sounds good.
With one who's developing a video game on the Vietnam conflict.
Wow.
So he's very interested in hearing about your story and also seeing some slides to maybe seeing if that can get translated virtually as well.
Oh, that'd be great.
But starting off, Ed, I think where we left off last time was right when you arrived at Fort Ord.
Right.
And you were just arriving, and would you mind actually going back into the story about how you arrived at Fort Ord, why you had to wander around for 24 hours, and possibly what did you have to swear in for and why?
Well, I got at the fort, and it was about 2 in the morning, I think, and very nervous, scared, cold. We're herded into actually a small auditorium, and the whole busload of us went in there. And the first thought in my head was, I'm going to hear my first words in the Army. And it kind of played over in my head for a while. I thought that's a strange thing to think about. Then a lieutenant walked up on the stage and didn't say a word, just stared at us all, kind of head moving back. And I thought, oh, he's going to speak his first word. And it came. It said, Bowen. That's the first word I heard in the Army, and that's my name. He says, Bowen, where's Bowen? So I raised my hand, very nervous, walked up, and there was an MP came out of the backstage, and he says, go with him. And so I thought, for what? What have I done? Anyway, the MP took me off into the cold night, and very cold, by the way. It was very cold. And he, very tired, and he opens up a barracks, and he says, or a small barracks, and he says, stay here till we come and get you. Now, that's very strange. So little bunk there, I fell asleep and woke up with a hailstorm, and well, it wasn't a full-on storm, but it had been hailing, and I kind of looked out the window and I saw the shaved heads, the guys had just processed in, and they were marching your left, right through, and I thought, oh my goodness, what's this? And anyway, I kept waiting for them to come and get me, and I got hungry, so I left my safe quarters and went out and found a mess hall and went in there and ate, came in for seconds. It was all mostly processing people. There were officers, a whole mixed group. So I had left there, and I thought I'll find a little souvenir shop, and I found a little card shop where I bought some cards, went back to my spot, wrote letters to my friends. By the way, some of them still have the letters, and they got a real kick out of it because it looks like the Army has forgotten me, And so
Had you been processed yet at that point?
No, nothing had happened. And in fact, and while I'm there, I'm thinking, they forgot about me. I'll just wait here for, I'll just spend my whole 2 years here, going back and forth. And it actually did happen to a guy that did the same thing. They actually sent him home and said, and we'll call for you to come back. Well, his name was Smith. It was a big thing in the Time magazine at that time because he had a common name, and they sent him home. And what happened is they did forget about him. And then he waited 2 years and came back and said, well, I served my time. And he wanted all his back pay. And it went to court and everything. I'm not sure how it played out. But anyway, I'm saying all this to say that they forgot about me. And then the same MP comes barging in to my, well, no, I spent several times back and forth to the mess halls, and he was actually walking in front of me and didn't see me reading some paperwork, and then all of a sudden he caught me out of the corner of his eye, and he just went ballistic, and he says, where the blankety blank have you been? So anyway, bottom line is he dragged me to the lieutenant from the night before that had sent me there, and the lieutenant panicked when he saw me, and he realized they had completely bungled it, and my orders were...
Sorry.
Okay. They completely bungled it, and they realized that they had to fix this problem. because my unit had already started basic training, so they juggled some paperwork around, and he said, "I'll go back to your room and we'll call you when we're ready." So I went back, did the same routine with the mess hall. And anyway, then I found out why they had done this, because I was a foreigner. I was a Canadian citizen. And so they herded me in a room for special processing and made us swear allegiance to America. There was a German there and a guy from Mexico. So that was the reason. But anyway, all this triggered chaos in my orders, because I was supposed to be in this unit that was going to, head out in basic training, but they had to throw me into a National Guard unit for mostly National Guard. So it was a whole different game, So that's how it happened in basic training. There was a lot more, but that's where it was. And of course, then the day came when, and I got, everybody was sick. People had pneumonia. Like I said, it was, in our barracks at night, it was 28 degrees. I saw the thermometer, and that they had to keep the windows open because of meningitis control. So anyway, everybody got sick. And I was begging to I wanted to go to the sick bay, and well, I had my wish. I got measles, covered all over me, So they have to put you in the hospital if you have measles. So, but you aren't really that sick. So in there, I don't know if you want to hear the practical joke story, but anyway, I was in there with a practical joker, and he thought he could pull some good ones on me. He stole my towels. He was just always pulling. He was laughing his head off when he pulled something off. And then he thought he finally had the clincher, and he says, "You know that cough you got, that cough?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, that means you're going to get a shot tonight." And he says, "It's not an ordinary shot." He said, "It's a long needle, and they put it in your rear end, and it's horrible." And so he rubbed that in all day, and I kept coughing, so anyway, we go to sleep, and I thought, I'm going to get him on this one. So I went to his chart, had a little red thing on it saying I was going to get the shot. Well, I switched charts. Anyway, the nurse comes in, I waited, and she comes in, and she just turns him over. He's half asleep and just nails him with that shot. He woke up and he realized what had happened. He actually did laugh, but we did that kind of stuff. And then, of course, I did get the shot, Anyway, that's... And then the dreaded day came when you were given your orders. So they lined us all up in our formation, and they would systematically go in a line, give your name, and give your orders. So when it came to me, he said, "Bowen, you have the assignment as a helicopter door gunner." Anyway, that was / mechanic, Fort Eustis, Virginia. So I knew that wasn't good. So I did get, to Fort Eustis, Virginia, and then this was just an incredible experience, because they lined us up about, I don't know, just when it was dark, I guess, and a very significant sergeant stood up and gave a speech. And I won't go into the whole speech, but basically what he said is, you're here for 10 weeks. Most of you will go to Vietnam, and many of you will die. That is what he said. I memorized exactly what he said. In fact, I said, I'm going to memorize this because it's significant. And I have to this day remembered exactly what he said. And then he followed that up with, be prepared to honor your country by dying for your country. And everybody was they were sweating bullets. And then he concluded it with a very kind of a strange statement. He said, "Don't try to get out of this school. No one has ever gotten out, and no one ever will." It just came buzzing into my head. But then I didn't hear an audible word from the Lord, but I did pray. I was praying, and I felt like I heard, "You're going to get out of the school." And that's a very strange thought. I thought, well, anyway, as the story goes, I did get out. And the way I got out was the one that told us we weren't going to get out got me out. Now, how that happened is a story in itself, which it's...
If you could recollect it just for posterity, because I'm trying a new setting today. Because I
Okay.
recall what we talked about was you were in formation, you're marching out to some, either an obstacle course, if I recall, but then,
Yeah.
down a step. Yeah, so please, yeah, go with that.
Yeah, so I got in the mechanic school slash door gunner, and I just go through this quick. I was a square peg in a round hole. I mean, I didn't function in mechanic school, and I had learning blocks all my life. Even as a kid, I had them. But they showed up very severely, and as a result, I was called to give an account. So I stood before the lieutenant who was grilling me, and he said, you know, you've had 5 years of college at USC, no, and that's not a dum-dum school. And he says, we believe that we have a term for people like you. We believe you're deliberately trying to flunk this so that you get recycled into a better assignment. And I assured him I wasn't. And he says, well, I'm not buying it, but we're going to give you another chance. And if we see you again, you're going straight to infantry. So anyway, as you can imagine, I left that with absolute wonderment of where I was going to head. But then it went from bad to worse. I mean, it just seemed like to cycle downward in my thinking in school and the testing. And finally, I realized it was an exercise in futility. So I was at the end of my rope, and we were marching to class. We did it every morning. We went through a forest, and it was a little 15-minute march to the class. And I just had this overwhelming feeling that the hopelessness of my situation, and I wasn't doing myself any good, nor was I doing the Army any good. I might as well. Anyway, this wasn't premeditated, but it was spontaneous. You left, right, left, and I left. Okay? That's called AWOL, all right? Now, AWOL is it's a serious thing, not as serious as desertion. In wartime, a desertion, World War II, they executed one guy for deserting. Eddie Skaggs, I think is what his name was. They made a movie on him, but anyway, that was very serious. But in this time, it wasn't as serious, but it was serious. So, bottom line, I knew the MPs were roaming the fort looking for me. I knew it. So I just walked off, found a little. By the way, the guy behind me, just when I did this, I saw his glance on his face like, "This, you crazy? What are you doing?" And anyway, that was the only guy that saw me. And then I'm off on my own. And anyway, I wandered away, and I found a little pond, and I was really tired. Everybody's tired, so I thought I'll take a nap. So I had a little pocket Bible, opened up, read that. And then a couple of deer came down to the pond with me, and it was paradise for a while. But then reality set in, and I realized I was in a real pickle. So I started to walk and pray, and I said, I was really talking to God and asking him why he had made me the way he did. Why can't I be like everyone else? I've got this problem, and why did you do this? And not only that, you did make me an artist. And so I want to be an artist. And I specifically prayed that. Now, that's a crazy thing to do when you're out there AWOL. But anyway, I was at the end of my rope, and I kept thinking, what am I going to do? And by the way, I found a diary as I was going through my old stuff this last week, and I found a diary of all this laid out. It's in a diary. And also a diary from Vietnam. As a combat artist, I found actually drawings in the sketchbook, a little sketchbook, which I was supposed to hand over to the Army, but somehow that didn't get handed over. But it had little pictures that I was drawing, and then the diary of what was happening exactly then. I thought that was a fascinating thing to find. But anyway, so I did write letters. This is all recorded on what I was doing. But anyway, so I'm wandering around thinking about what am I going to do next, and I can't underestimate the fact of how much of a stress situation this was. I was not calm. I was not collected. I was in somewhat of a panic, knowing that I was doomed. And so my thought came into my head, go to the highest person in charge and find this person. Could be a general who's in charge, but I thought, no, I'll go to the sergeant's office, the one. Sergeant? Yes, and he had the stripes wiggling all down his arm. He was no lightweight, very feared. So anyway, you don't just march into his office. You've got to go through the.
1 sec.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, you don't just march into his office. You got to go to the front desk. And so I went into the barracks and or the building, and I saw the lieutenant, not the lieutenant, but the officer, the guy, the clerk is what I'm getting at behind the desk. And I went up to him, and he was kind of rude, and he says, "What are you here for?" And I says, "Well, I need to see the first sergeant." He kind of stared at me for what? And I said, "Well, we have personal business to discuss." Well, that turned out to be the right exact words, because it kind of played in his head for a little bit. So he says, "Wait here and I'll be right back." So he marched down the hall, long hall, came back. He said, "He'll see you right now." And I thought, what, right now? And right now? I don't know if I can handle this. And yeah, he wants to see you right now. So I marched down the hall. I felt like Daniel going into the lion's den, but as I got there, I could see the door was open. I can visualize it right now. He was to the left, sitting behind his desk, no helmet on. Wasn't really focused on me right away, but as I got to the door, he says, "Come on in." And then he says, "Why are you here?" And I think he was very curious about this personal business. And I says, "Well, First Sergeant, I'm in the wrong school." That's all I said. He hesitated a minute. And it was like something took over his voice, and I'll kind of exaggerate this. He says, "Well, what do you like to do?" And that's an exaggeration, but the fact is he was really a pronounced change in his countenance. And then I was stunned for a minute, and I thought, well, I'll just tell him. I said, "I'm an artist and I like to paint." And he just kind of, with a stunned look, he kind of rolls back in his chair. You're the man I'm looking for. I've been thinking of a painting I'd like, and helicopter battle scene. Can you paint tanks, trucks, whatever? I said, "Yes, I'm an artist, and I taught art at high school, art major from USC. I don't know if I said that exactly, but anyway, he got very interested. We talked. He must have been there between it seemed like an hour that I was there, because we talked about everything to do with teaching and art. And then he was saying where I could get some paints and canvas. There was a craft shop on the fort, and he said, "I want you to do this. This is going to be your assignment. I want you to drop everything you're doing and do this, a helicopter battle scene of a Chinook helicopter." And so when I left, I was just overwhelmed with excitement. I walked down the hall, saw the clerk, and he just thought, "What were you in there for all that time for, man? What's going on?" And I said, "You wouldn't believe it if I told you." So I left, and this is an amazing thing. I got outside that barracks, and I was so overwhelmed that this happened. I knew that God was doing this. I just knew it. And so I don't know exactly how I did this, but it seemed like I was out there praising God, thanking him for liberating me, delivering me from, and by the way, the lieutenant and the clerk, they didn't know that I'd gone AWOL, and otherwise this would have been a different story. So I knew the MPs, they're not going to find me in that office. They're not going to find me in that building. They're going to look somewhere else. So I was safe in there for that hour. And anyway, when I left, I'd said, "Okay, whatever happens now, doesn't matter, because I got the orders from the big guy, up the top chain." But this is the amazing thing, is I'm standing there thanking the Lord, and I hear off in the distance, "Your left, right, left," and it was my platoon coming back from the long day at the shop there where they were learning. And I thought to myself, I could see them coming toward that barracks. I know they're going to have to pass me. And I thought, I'm going to have some real fun with this one. So I did exactly that. I waited, kind of just stood there casually, and I watched them coming, and then I watched the platoon sergeant, who knew I'd left, and he was accountable for it. And so I see him, and I see his sudden face, the countenance just change on his face. And then the guy's looking real panicked, and he stood them off to the side and told them to stand there until he was done chewing me out. So he went over to me. This is very close to that barracks where the sergeant was. It was within feet. And he just started, his usual blankety blank, whatever. It was terrible. And then I just waited till he was done doing with his tirade, and and he said, what the blank have you been doing? And I said, well, Sergeant, didn't you know that I'm on a personal assignment with the first sergeant? We're personal business, you know. We have an assignment together. And so he just he didn't believe it. Then he started to think, well, what are you doing? What is it? And I said, well, I'm an artist now. I'm an artist for the sergeant. I'm going to be doing artwork for him. And this is my assignment. So he just couldn't believe it. I mean, he finally settled into belief, and then he dismissed all the guys. And he came over and kind of took me to the side, and he just got right into my face with a kind of almost like a baffled, even a humble look. And he says, what is this? And I says, well, it really is true. I'm going to be doing this. And he said, then he shook his head and he said, Bowen, you're the only one I know that can step on blank and come out smelling like a rose. That's something I memorized because I thought it was pretty humorous. Anyway, that got me off the hook. I did the painting. Took me a little more than 3 days, like I thought. Took it into the sergeant, and he just, and I think God helped me with the painting because it came out pretty good, I think. Anyway, he loved it. And it was very large too. It was probably 4 feet wide. And he said, this is just more than I anticipated. I'm very, very excited about this. And I want to hang it we'll hang it in the mess hall. So we walked over together to the mess hall. He said, we'll put it right here and everybody will see it. So they hung it up that day. And the timing was so amazing because that very day, the colonel came in to inspect the mess hall. Well, I never did see the colonel, but next thing I know, I'm being called to the sergeant. It says, well, we've discussed things, and the colonel and I, and we've decided that you need to be doing paintings for us. So we have a little shack for you down by a little pond, he says. And I said, I couldn't believe it. And I knew it was amazing. And he said, we have to clear out a bunch of junk out of there, tools, but we'll get it set up as a little art shop. And then he said, so now you're just going to do things that we ask you to do. And so the guys that I was with were just absolutely, this is like, I don't know, this is the moment of high after the moment of low, because I was able to have fun with them and joke around, and it became a big joke. And that even some of the guys said, can you get us a sign to go with you for the day? So I pulled it off a couple of times where they would come out there and mix paints or whatever. And then the cook would make me a lunch up every day. So I had a sack lunch with all the best of lunch you could even imagine. And I'd be in formation with my paintbrushes in one hand and my sack lunch in the other. And then everybody's laughing. We could hardly, the formation was having a hard time holding it together. But they would march to class, and then I'd do my single man march off to my little shack. So I painted the class was about a 10-week class, I think. Well, I painted that whole 10 weeks. And then I began to realize, hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? And I thought, what are they going to do with me? I can't do this forever. And then the sergeant calls me in, and he says, I don't know if he called me Ed by this time. We were on a personal name basis. He says, you've done me a lot of favors. I really appreciate all this artwork. And I've done you a favor. And he said, I've had your orders changed. I thought, wow, that's exciting. It's something to do with art, I know. Because he had me fill out some paperwork and send some of my art slides to the Pentagon. And he had taken trips on during the week. He knew people in high places. Anyway, the bottom line is that the people in high places were trying to get me into an art program. I didn't realize this at the time. But what happened is they were trying to do it, but couldn't do it because the art program had already taken off to Vietnam. And I didn't realize it at the time, all this. And the sergeant thought that they had eliminated me from the plan. He didn't know this. He didn't know, and I didn't know, but later on, it was all really taking time to unravel, and did eventually happen. So I became a combat artist eventually, but anyway, he said, I've had your orders changed. You're going to be a clerk. You're going to clerk school. And it's in a beautiful little fort in Arizona called Fort Huachuca. It's tucked in the hills. It's an old cavalry fort from the cavalry days, very small fort. But you're gonna be having, you're not gonna go to, probably not gonna go to Vietnam. You're gonna be a clerk. If you go there, you'll be safe. And so basically, aren't you glad? and I really was glad, but I was nervous because I knew I was not gonna function as a clerk.
Sorry, 1 second. Okay.
So that's, the assignment was, anyway, I didn't realize it, but I had to process out almost immediately. And so I was going through the processing and I saw lifers, looking at my orders, and one of them said to the other, they can't do this. This guy's never graduated from this school. And he's now a certified helicopter transmission mechanic / door gunner. No, they can't do that. And the other guy says, I guess the Army knows what they're doing. And so they processed me through, and I had no time to say goodbye to my buddies. I just put notes under their pillows and said, one particular guy named Bob Marks from Seattle, he was joking around with me about all this, and he said, he kept telling me I was not going to get out of this school. No one gets out. And I said, I'm getting out. And he said, no, you're not. I said, yes, I am. Anyway, I just put a note under his pillow, Bob, I'm gone. That's all. And I never saw the guy ever again, but I know he must have laughed his head off because I was gone, Anyway, that's part one, process out, and then I went to Fort Huachuca. So that's the first part of the story.
I'm just going to change some lighting real
Okay.
quick.
We'll get a little water in me.
A little water. That's still good.
Which one is the decaf?
Oh, that one.
Okay. Or no sugar, I hope.
Yeah, it's just sugar-free. It's just
Yeah.
unsweetened iced tea.
Okay, that's
And
good.
it's black tea, if that's okay.
That'll be good. My throat keeps doing it. Am I okay with a bad voice?
Yeah, that's the nice thing about that mic boom that I have is that it can really, it basically makes it very clear.
Okay.
But if you do feel that coming on, please just drink some water.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do.
That's not a problem or tea or anything like that. Can you guys? Okay, perfect. I'm going to use my headphones and place it near to him to see if that makes it easier for you guys to listen to. Yeah, I'm here. Hear you now. Okay. Try this. Okay. And then let's see. Put this here for them to hear.
Okay. That's good.
Can you say something then?
Yeah, so here I am and I'm enjoying myself. I can't believe how wonderful this is. Thank you, Jesus.
Perfect. So end part one. You're on your way to Arizona.
Yes, and it was a hot summer. I had just gotten there, and
What year is this?
this would be 1968. And while I was at Fort Eustis, Robert Kennedy was assassinated. Martin Luther King was assassinated. So it was an interesting time, a lot going on. That was in that 10-week period.
How did you react hearing that, those kind of pieces of news?
Everybody was shocked. I mean, I think Robert Kennedy, after JFK had been assassinated, so here it's not too long after that, and I remember that. We were all just overwhelmed, and then Martin Luther King assassinated. This is a very volatile time for the country and the war situation. It was intense. 68 was that was the Tet Offensive. In fact, the Tet Offensive was going on Well, I was at Fort Eustis, and I don't remember if they really told us what was going on because we weren't privy to all that information, but it turned out to be that is when it happened. And then I was there right after that. Well, not right after it, but actually I was there in January. I came there in Vietnam in January of '69, so the Tet had been previous year. But anyway, so I traveled, I went to Fort Huachuca, and then, just like the sergeant said, it was a beautiful little fort. And anyway, so it was hot summer, and we started the clerk school, and I thought, well, this is going to be a challenge, because I knew I had clerical problems, and I've been in a typewriting class when I was in junior high. In fact, I had a great talk on the phone the other night with my best friend, one of my best friends from childhood, Mike Napier, who is an attorney in Arizona. And he sent me pictures of two of us getting our graduation in I think it was in '59, or right in that era from junior high. And I'm about 5'4", and he's close to 6 feet. And so now he stayed at that, and I went above him. I became 6'3". So it's such a funny little picture. We were laughing over it, but anyway. Where was I going with all that? But anyway, Arizona, beautiful little fort. I loved the place. But then, here's what I'm getting at. Mike and I had a typewriting class in junior high. Both got kicked out of the class, and he remembers all the details. So do I. And but anyway, my max was 12 words a minute, and he laughed his head off at that then because I could never get past 12 words a minute. So here, that's going in my head as I'm starting this typing class. We typed in the morning. In the afternoon, we had the clerical forms tests. We learned how to use all the forms. And so I'm seated at the front row. Alphabetically, I'm B, so the B's go right up there. I'm up there, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this instructor's looking right down at me. And anyway, we started, and I thought, oh, I'm gonna really do good here because I think I can do this. And anyway, I just couldn't do it. And the guys that were there were mostly 18, 19 years old, and I was 24, and I'd been a teacher, and these guys were just, and they started laughing at me because I couldn't get past 12 words a minute. And they were like machine gun Kellys back there, like this, they were humming on their typewriters at 18, 19 years old, 50 words a minute and things like that. So anyway, I got embarrassed and I was frustrated, and you know how it is when you get frustrated, you lock up, I locked up. I couldn't get past 12 words a minute. And that was pretty bad, but then the clerical forms in the afternoon, super hot in the afternoon there, no air conditioning. Anyway, I think there was flies in the place, and it was just depressing really, but anyway, my mind just jammed up. And so I did just like I did at I guess I didn't mention this, but at Fort Eustis when I was trying to learn the clerical or the mechanical stuff and all the charts and everything and manuals. We looked through these manuals. I got so confused. So back then I brought a sketch pad to class. And when the instructor was up there on the charts, I was drawing pictures because it bored me so much. And so I was into what I like to do, and I couldn't help myself. I had to draw, So I'm in the clerical in the afternoon with my sketch pad, and these instructors talking. Anyway, this all led to disaster because test day came, and just like before, I flunked them. I was a square peg in a round hole again, and disaster, and of course accountability time. I had to stand before. Anyway, I was called before, not one lieutenant like before, but a board of guys. There was 5 of them, and there were lieutenants and officers, and then there was one sergeant who was a very nasty sergeant, and he looked me right in the eye, and he kind of led the group, and they all talked to me, and he says, oh boy, you are in trouble here. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but we don't believe you, you've had, now this is what he said. He said, you're a qualified helicopter transmission mechanic, and you passed all that, and you've had all these years in college, and you can't even type, and you can't do this stuff. we believe, and he used the same word, we believe you're a shirker. It's a word we have. And it's those that deliberately try to flunk. And he says, we know what you're doing. And but he was not nice like the other guy. He was mean. And he said, you go back in there, and you don't want to see us again. If you see us again, you're in trouble. So you go back, and we know what you're doing. We'll give you a chance to straighten it out. So I just got determined I was going to make it work. Got worse, froze up even more. You know what it's like when a weak chicken and the other chickens determine it's weak? Well, they peck it to death, because that's what happens, And well, I was the weak chicken, and all these young guys in there I became the laughing stock of the whole class. And it was I took it I had a good-natured attitude about it, but it sort of wore away at me after a while, because, and they weren't really picking on me, they were just having fun. But it became a joke, that I couldn't do this. So I began to get very concerned that I was going to be seeing that board again. And as I progressed, it got worse. And then finally, one morning, this is when the great break happened for me, because they lined us up early in the morning. It's practically dark out. And they says, okay, we're giving everybody a 3-hour break. Usually it's 15 minutes. They said, no, you're going to be out you can come back in 3 hours, but we ask you to pick up the cigarette butts on the fort. But see you back in 3 hours. And I thought, my God, this is great. So I took off across the fort, and it's a beautiful fort. Actually, it's desert, but it's nice. And so I'm walking and praying, and I'm asking, crying out to God really for another escape valve, and I just walk in, and I see all the buildings, and they're all old, barracks and everything. But then off in the distance, I see a really nice building. I thought, my gosh, that's not the usual building. What's that? So I walked over, and I looked up, and it said craft shop on the outside. And it said, my gosh, an art shop. That's down my alley. So I walk in, and filled with all these women that were mostly officers' wives, and they were having their fun with their little ceramics. And they were making these little slip mold casts. They pour the slip mold into a mold, and it's really corny stuff. I mean, it comes out, there's a Santa Claus, there's a Buddha, there's all these little fun things. They painted this stuff. They'd put it in the kilns, fire it, and they come out, and then they'd do their little Mona Lisa touches to it. Then they'd send it off for firing, and then they get all excited. Well, anyway, I saw that it wasn't real art, But that was the front room, the major room. But then there was all these little rooms in the back. So out of curiosity, I went back there, and all I saw was these easels and paintings and canvases. And I thought, oh my gosh, this really is an art shop. And nobody was back there except in one little room off to the side. I heard this kind of low roar, and it was a ceramic wheel. Someone was spinning a wheel. So I kind of peeked in, and I saw there was a kind of a pretty lady there, and she was making her, and she didn't really want to look up because she was right in making her pot. And so she kind of glanced up and saw me, and then I waited till she was done, and she looked up and said something about, I said something to her. I said, wow, you're an artist. That's quite an art form you're making there. And began to talk to her, and she said, and I said, well, I'm an artist. And she says, you're an artist? What kind of artist? I said, well, I taught art at high school. I went to USC as an art major, and I don't remember if I said exactly that, but anyway, we got in an art discussion. She got all excited, and she says, wow, I've been wanting to get somebody here to teach art at this craft shop. And she says, why don't you give me your name, rank, serial number, and I'll see what I can do. And so I left her with she says, then she says, you'll hear from me. And I was curious. I went to the front desk, and I said, who's the lady in the back? And the clerk says, well, don't you know that's the post commander's wife? And she runs the fort. And I thought, oh my God, this is my release valve. This is my great escape, And I just knew that it was God's hand getting me positioned. And it certainly was, because I go back absolutely excited. And that night in the barracks, I kind of played around with these guys. Says, well, I've met somebody real important, and I'm going to be getting out of this. And it became kind of a joke. And then we got in our early morning salute to the sun as it rises up, and hear the sergeant give his usual verbal abuse against us. And then suddenly he stops and he goes, Bowen, where's Bowen? Come up here, And he called me forth, leave the firm, and he says, you are given orders to report immediately to the craft shop. So everybody started laughing, and I went there, and she said, okay, relax, get this smock on, you're gonna be here as an art instructor. And so anyway, that was, and by the way, she was no lightweight. She did run the fort. In fact, one day she wanted she had a Victorian house, these old Victorian houses, from the way back, and she had one of those, and she decided that it needed to be painted. So she decided only officers were worthy of painting it. So she had officers paint it. That's how powerful she was. She just, whatever she wanted, she had. So the story goes on from there, but that's, okay, you want me to keep going on that story? Okay. It got very exciting because there was, in fact, there was one of the guys in my clerk school that was also an artist. His name was Jim Oakes, and he found out what I was doing, and he says, oh my gosh, is it possible you can kind of talk her in and get me over there? And so I did, and she got him to come in there too. And so we were there having the time of our lives, and she was just loving us and loving what we were doing, and we were painting most of the time and just had fun. And then she says, I think it would be good if all of us, and there was 4 of us that were in that craft shop they were artists and various things. One was a photographer, and says, and one was a ceramic guy. He had his own kiln he built. That's a funny story because he built the kiln, and it was a big to-do that he'd gotten the kiln all fixed up. And she came, and different officers came for the great grand opening of his kiln. So he had everything fired in there, and he opened the door, and the flame shot out, and all his hair was burned off. And it didn't really make too much of a problem on his face, but it was so funny because everybody cracked up. But anyway, we were all like a little family by then, and she says, okay, I think it'd be good if all of us would go to a craft seminar in San Jose, California. And so I had the only car, a 64 Chevy. And so now this is crazy stuff. I mean, here she's the post commander's wife. And
you're a PFC.
Yeah, I was a PFC. And we're all going to go to San Jose to a seminar. And is her husband saying okay? He did, and so off we packed in my 64 Chevy and got to San Jose. It was a fantastic seminar, and by the way, a little very side story to this that was somewhat humorous is on the way up, we had to go through Riverside where I grew up, and I said, well, we could stay at my parents' house. So here's the post commander's wife staying at my house with my parents and the artist. It was just it's hilarious. But on the way, I said, well, we're going to go up to San Jose. Is there any way we can go by USC and maybe, you could get a motel for the night and we could all get a motel and stay there? And that way I could see all my old friends and go by the campus. And she said, yeah, let's do that. So she got a motel right next to the campus. And then I met my old buddy, Dennis Boucher, and a lifelong friend from childhood all the way up. Both went to USC as art majors. And he was there getting his master's. So I said, Dennis, I'm here. He said, well, let's get in my car and we'll go up to Hollywood and have some good times. And he had a 64 Mustang, so we all packed in there. And the post commander's wife stayed at home and said, oh, good, I'll just stay for the day and enjoy myself. And when you guys get back, that'll be great. So we went to Hollywood, saw the sights. But Dennis got lost on the way back. And we didn't get back there till super late. And I thought, oh my gosh, it's dark. I'm going to have to go up to her door. And so I knocked on the door kind of nervous, and she answers the door, and it wasn't the same Maxine. Her face was so angry. And by the way, she had been a World War II WAC, Women's Army Corps. So she was a major. She was a tough nut. So, and she basically looked at us like, boy, she said, you're in trouble. She says, I thought you had gone AWOL, so I've already contacted my husband, and you're in trouble. You guys are all in trouble. And then I just ate humble pie, and I said, Maxine, I'm sorry, this wasn't what, and I just don't know what I said, but it just disarmed her. And suddenly she just changed. She says, okay, got on her phone, told her husband, they're here, everything's fine. And so that was just one of the crazy things that happened. So off we go to San Jose. had a great seminar, came back. We got back. A few days later, she says, I'm going to cook a big dinner for you at my house. So you and Jim Oakes, I'm going to have you come over for dinner. And so we did. And, she had the big spread on the big table. And so the post commander's sitting at the head of the table. And I'm as nervous. I was just like sitting there. What if I drop my fork down the wrong way? And, but he was like, remember the movie Sound of Music?
Yeah.
With the Baron,
Yeah.
Well, anyway, he seemed like that kind of guy, but he sat there like,
aristocratic.
Yeah, aristocratic, and also kind of like, he looked like Humphrey Bogart. That's all I can remember. He had a face like him, and he just sat there at the end of the table and just like was putting up with Maxine, his wife, and he just like didn't say one word to me, not even anything, not hello, how are you doing? Just sat there, just eating his dinner and said nothing. So I was very nervous. But that gives you the idea of what
power she had.
She had the power, and so anyway, I was just drifting along for months, and this was going great. And I thought, I will spend my whole Vietnam, my whole time here, and everything was going beautiful until one day a sergeant called me. She got a report to my office immediately. I have some information, so I went to his, kind of nervous, and he says, "Sit down, Bowen." He says, "Okay," he said. I've been in the Army for 17 years, and I have never seen orders. You got orders to go to Vietnam. And I thought, oh no, I missed it. But see, I was about 2 weeks short of a year. And they won't send you to Vietnam if that deadline was approaching. So I knew, I thought I didn't make it. And he said, never seen orders like these. These are orders to go to Vietnam, but you do not have to go if you don't want to. And I said, what is this? And he says, well, you've been selected for a very incredible assignment as a combat artist. And I thought, there it is. That's what the sergeant. And turned out that I missed Team 7, which goes on for several months, and I was selected for Team 8. And I thought, and then he said, you'd be crazy if you don't do this. It's an opportunity of a lifetime. It's all for history purposes. Your artwork will be in the museums and in the Pentagon and the Smithsonian. It's a highly select, and it turned out there was 46 total combat artists in the Army. So I was one of 46. But he said, you don't have to go, but you're crazy if you don't. I think he said you've got 5 days to decide. And so I left thinking, I'm not going. I'm just not going to go because I'll know it's too dangerous. And then I started to, pray. And just then I got a Dear John letter from my girlfriend, and Ginger was her name. And so I said, what the heck, I'm going. And I'd prayed about it, and I determined. And then I went. That's it. That's part 2.
Please have some water. If you
Yeah.
need. I'm just going to check the equipment real quick.
And part 3 is Vietnam.
There. Lighting is good. Let me just check in with these guys real quick. Everything going here, boys? Hello? Sorry, Ed.
Oh, that's okay. I'm just thinking this through here.
Can you guys hear okay? Nope. My own caffeine.
Yeah.
All right, Ed, so you were in Arizona.
Mm-hmm.
You failed out of 2 schools, technically.
Right.
You've somehow found your calling
Yeah.
in each of those instances moving forward, shaping
Right.
your destiny. and you got a Dear John letter right when you found out you had the option of going to Vietnam.
Right.
And you chose to. So, did you hear that?
Yeah, little beeps.
Was that from back there?
I think it was from there, I thought.
Huh, I don't know where that came from. So, can you describe how you left Arizona and eventually made it over into, did you go to Japan first, Okinawa before?
No, we left from San Francisco and we went to Japan on the way over, and Tokyo. Or maybe it was on the way back. I think it was on the way over, if I remember.
Did you go by ship or by plane?
No, plane, yeah. But when my friends found out, one of my friends was Ron Schaefer, who is, I just found his letters while I was going through. He had a ream of letters he sent me while he was in Vietnam at the same time. He was a writer for the Stars and Stripes, which is he was so well known as a writer that he ended up working at the Washington Post as a major writer there later, and just died last year. But he was famous for he was called Dr. Gridlock, and you can look him up, but he's a famous guy. But anyway, I just found his letters, and he was encouraging me on the art program in one of the letters, saying that this is an amazing program, and he described what it was. And I had no idea what it was when I went, but what it was, and in his descriptions give it pretty clearly, that it's an historical thing where they want records of the war from an artistic point of view with select artists doing it. And actually goes back to the Civil War where they first assigned combat artists. And one of them was Winslow Homer, which was one of my favorite artists. In fact, I took, and I didn't know idea about this at the time, but I loved his work so much. Life magazine did books on famous artists, so they did one on Winslow Homer, and I took it to Vietnam with me to study his art because I liked it and I wanted to be like him, So anyway, I found out that the whole program, as Ron Schaefer described it, was to do what other combat artists have done, and that's to depict the war artistically for historical purposes. And they had Winslow Homer in World War I. There was combat artists in the Spanish-American War. In fact, Frederick Remington was a combat artist and one of his paintings shows Teddy Roosevelt leading the charge.
San Juan.
Yeah, San Juan. And so he was an artist then. And then World War I, you have very specifically assigned combat artists. And then, of course, it went from World War II, where they selected 22 artists. But then Congress scrapped the program. And they said it's going to be too expensive. And get this. It was $125,000 for their program compared to the $70 billion budget. So they turned it down. The artists were just so disappointed because they'd been picked. And then Eisenhower and Marshall, who were art lovers, and in fact, Eisenhower himself was a really good artist. He got upset, so they said no to Congress. You switch this over, we're going to have it. So guess who won? Eisenhower and Marshall. So, in fact, one of the artists named Ed Reep, he stood in front of Eisenhower's desk, and Eisenhower, of course, he was shaking in his boots, but Eisenhower said to him, Ed, the program is a go. I want you to know that you guys are going to do it. And while he was wanting to thank him, suddenly Eisenhower jumps out of his chair and goes into the hall and starts doing jumping jacks. I think it's so funny. It's a sidelight of the story, but it goes to show you the power that those guys had. Of course, Eisenhower and Marshall were the lead figures, Eisenhower being the supreme commander of the Allied forces in the invasion of Europe. So he was no lightweight. And then he became president later. But
Marshall was the chief of the army.
And army, yeah, these guys were powerful. So all they got to do is to give the word. I say all that to say that combat artists were very significant. The artwork ended up in the Smithsonian and the Pentagon. In fact, a sad thing is during the 9/11 attack, when the Pentagon was hit, the location that it was hit was where a lot of the combat art was, and it was lost. So and I don't know if my stuff is in there or not. I don't know. But the good thing is I have records of it, so that's good. But anyway, the program, not knowing what it was about, I found out from Ron Schaefer, and then when I got to Vietnam, I met together with 4 other artists and a supervisor, and we met in Long Binh, and that became our headquarters. We had a actual specified building there in Long Binh that was just combat artists, and it would rotate every 5 to 6 months. A new combat art team would come in, and actually in total there was 9 combat artist teams for the Vietnam War as far as the Army. Well, I was in Team 8. So we got there. The supervisor, Fred Engels, gave us a rundown. He was about 35 years old, I guess, and he gave us a rundown on what we were going to do. He says, I'm the coordinator. This is your shop here. You can do a lot of your artwork here, but we're going to go out on missions all over Vietnam for the next 2 months. And he said it's going to be intense at times. It's going to be dangerous. But you have liberty, and you can tell us what you would like to do more. So we will follow the pattern of what you want to do. And so there's 3 officers in our group and 2 enlisted. I wasn't an officer. I was a E3 or E4, and the other guy, oh my gosh, Victory Reynolds, and he was the other's third Spec 4. And then the 3 officers. And by the way, the 3 officers told us, hey, forget the rank. You don't have to salute us. We got to be a team. We can't be going through all this mumbo jumbo. So just respect us, but, we're a team.
And there was a total of 5 of you in team?
5, yeah, 5. So our assignment was to see as much of Vietnam we could in 2 months. Now that sounds like, wow, how are you going to do all this in 2? We saw so much in 2 months, you can't even believe it. We didn't need to see any more, and I didn't want to see any more after I saw what I had seen. And but I tried to. They allowed us to have freedom, so I said I kind of want to stay in the safe areas, So, but I ended up in 2 crazy situations that were the most dangerous places you could possibly be, and that's where a lot of my art inspiration came from, because I was so taken back by what happened in these 2 locations that the impression was so strong on me that I now do a lot of artwork that's related to those events, those 2.
What was the first of them?
The first one was a rubber plantation up, and I'm not sure the city, although the Army knows, because when I applied for PTSD, which they did give me 50% disabled, they did give me the location of that one that I experienced these things at. But it was, shall I say, traumatic to say the least. It was a rubber plantation. We arrived there, not the combat art team. I was the only one in our combat art team that was there, but there was some local artists that joined me. So we got there, landing on the runway, and mortars were hitting, or rockets, whatever. No, it wasn't rockets, it was mortars hitting the runway. So it tore the runway up. We were herded into this was all French buildings. It was a rubber plantation, if I remember right. But lieutenant that greeted us, I say greeted, he was shaking his boots. He was terrified. And mortars were hitting here and there. And he says, I know you guys are coming here, but you can't leave. No one's leaving. No one's coming in and no one's going out. And that, if I recall this, I'll try to remember his words, but he said, we're expecting, intelligence has reported that we're expecting a mass of North Vietnamese that are poised to take this fort tonight. And we believe it's going to happen. And so you can't leave. And so we all had 45 pistols. And he said, I'll try to find you a place to stay, because there's bunkers, but they're all filled. So he found us a little shack that was above ground, and I thought, this is nuts, because they're going to overrun us. And so he pointed to the mess hall. We were walking around the fort, and he was pointing at things. He says, the mess hall, don't eat in the mess hall. So he got hit, they know where it's at, he got hit, several of our guys were killed. And so the whole day was just, it was just shuddering in terror, really.
When did you arrive, in the morning or in the afternoon?
I think it was around noon we got there, but the rest of the day we kind of combed the fort, and there's a perimeter around it. It's like the old cavalry days forts, where everything's safe on the inside, and you have the perimeter, and the fort is only as strong as the weakest point. Like you have a bunker about every 50 yards all the way around it. So usually 3 guys are taking in a bunker, and they got to be on the alert. And if there's an overrun, now there's barbed wire all the way around. There's trip wires. There's all kinds of ways, noisemakers, everything that in layers of barbed wire with. So it's, and then mines, you know. So to get through, it's a pretty tough, tall order for them to get through. But they try. So he told us they're probably going to try. Now the way they usually do this is they first of all will start to mortar, which means if you hear mortars coming in, that means that they're getting probably ready to overrun. And he said I don't know if he said a few days ago or what, but in my recollection is they tried to overrun it, and it was an all-night battle. They penetrated the perimeter. Guys were fighting from trees, up in the trees. And he said, and there was many casualties on both sides. And he said, so this is going to be, we think, another one of those. So hunker down tonight. So we got in the bunker. It wasn't a bunker, it was a hooch. And everything was calm. We went to sleep. We had cots, you know. And then, I don't know, sometime in the middle of the night, you hear off in the distance a boom like that. And what they do is they don't just, they drop them in a sequence with a pause, and the second one goes off, then you know the direction. In other words, you know if it's coming away from you, because they don't do it staggering, they do it boom, like a giant taking steps. Boom, boom, boom. We could tell we're right on the line. And so we're all up just screaming. And then the next one came, and the next one, and then by that time we were all trying to get as low to the ground as we could, and then all of a sudden it hit, and the shrapnel just went ripping through the hooch. And everybody was, it was interesting to see the reaction of people, because these were, you know, everyday soldiers, and you wonder what is their reaction. Well, I know what my reaction was. I was crying out to God. I says, God, no, not now, please help, you know, that sort of thing. And the other guy, some guys were cursing. I couldn't believe it, you know, just, oh my God, I was surprised the words that came out of them, but they were low crawling, trying to get out of the, and then all of a sudden one of them hit, one of the mortars hit, and it hit the generator right next to our hooch, and it just blasted that thing, and the fire started shooting out of it. And so I low crawled out. I don't know where those guys went, but I saw the fire shooting up, and I could see everything, which was great, because there's no street lights, you know, it's a night, when it's dark there, it's dark. But the flame shut up, so I was able to see everything. And so I started walking, I guess. I don't know, I was low crawling for a while, but I was walking. And then I saw what looked like a structure, and I thought I'll try to hide in that structure. Well, it turned out it was a swimming pool that was built by the French, one of those old pools up above the ground. And then as I went around the light, I could still see there was catacombs underneath. So I made my way into those catacombs and went as deep in as I could. But then you could see the light hitting when mortars and things would go off, and the light would hit the water trickling, and it was this eerie. I thought there was snakes in there. And so I spent the night in there just with my .45 pistol, which wouldn't fire because I jammed it with sand. Anyway, I knew that I had a vivid imagination of bayonets and knives coming in to get me. And so I don't know how the guys react, but I was not, there was nothing. You know, and as a Christian, you're not supposed to fear. Well, that's baloney. You fear. I mean, you have a fear, it's a healthy fear, and it's probably a good fear, because you need to be on your toes, you know, when this happened. But I spent the night, I remember shaking a lot and praying, and the whole night when they did not overrun that night.
So they did, it wasn't just mortar fire hitting the position, they did launch an actual attack on them.
I think, well, they may have tried to break through the perimeter, but
Did you hear small arms going?
a lot of stuff, yeah, you hear that all night. And so I never really found out if they penetrated the perimeter, but my imagination, and from the description that the lieutenant gave me, I did paint a picture of the overrun. And the way I've got it is and this is interesting because when they overrun, these are expendables. They send these guys, these North Vietnamese, they drug them up, they get them naked, and maybe not totally naked, but some are totally naked. So the point guys, or the guys that go in initially, are naked so that they can feel everything, and they're drugged, and so they want to be able to feel tripwires and feel. So they're, like I said, expendables. And for some reason or other, I don't say they didn't care about life, but their whole mentality in the North was these guys are expendables and we can send them out. They did that with the French. The French found that in Dien Bien Phu, where they would send masses and waves, where they would be piling up bodies, and the machine guns would be going off, wave after wave. And this is crazy war. I mean, how, and that mentality that will send these people to die, I thought, what is in their heads? But that's been typical over the centuries of war, where people are considered expendables. So, and I just can't believe that. But anyway, what they would do is they would try to find the weakest point in the perimeter, and then when they felt like they could get through, these maybe 2 or 3 that weaseled their way through, then they would signal for the others to come through. And when they came through, they had no regard. They just, it was a thundering herd. And somebody I talked to a guy from Quezon that saw this happen, and he said, it wasn't a wave, it was a thundering herd. That's the way he described it. And so when they come through, they just are gonna blast in until they can penetrate the perimeter. And they'll, massacre the guys on the point, within the bunker. And those guys, if they can, and so I did a painting of our guys trying to machine gun them as they're coming through. And that's one of the paintings that I had to do. I did it very large, as 4 feet wide, but I wanted people to never forget that's what it was like for these guys.
Now that night, were there any casualties taken by the Americans, or?
The night that I was there, I never found out the details, because as soon as we were able to get kind of together, our group, we didn't really find out, because they said, we're getting you out of here as quick as we can now. We got the runway clear. So we got on the next aircraft out of there, and I was so glad to get out of there. But I left that lieutenant, I often wonder what had happened to him, and did they get overrun the next night, or, how these guys, I gotta say this, I have a lot of respect for our military over there that weathered this thing, because guys would go over for a year, It wasn't like World War II. It was where there's an enemy way off there and you're going to penetrate there. No, you were there, you didn't know when you were going to get hit. Psychologically, I think the mentality of the average soldier was wearing away at his psyche, so much so that a lot of them did get PTSD, and guys would actually shoot themselves, in order to get a wound in the foot or something, so they could get. People did not. Most of the people that I met were so disillusioned with the war. I don't want to say they weren't patriots. I think they were, but some of them were so disillusioned with why is this lingering on for 10 years? Why can't we get this done? We're supposed to accomplish something over here. Why is the leadership so bungled up? And so many different plans. There was the body count thing, we'll build up the body count. Yeah, that's crazy. And so anyway, I just say all this as a team. We gathered an incredible amount of sketches, and then we worked out of Long Bin doing the sketches and mostly some paintings. And then from there, when we gathered this material, then I had my second terrible experience, but I don't know if I have time to tell that one, but then we headed off to Hawaii, where we had a studio for 3 months, where we would do the finished work. And it was a Class A situation, whatever we wanted as far as art materials, freedom of expression, whatever you want to do. So that was Hawaii. That was awesome.
Would you mind going into the second experience?
Yeah, the second experience to me was not as intense, anything like that first one, but this was about a week or so to go, and I was asked, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to go to the safest place in Vietnam. So I said, I remember the guy in charge said, well, there is a safe place. It is considered the safest place in Vietnam. So I got in the helicopter, and it was about 35 miles north of Saigon. It was an extinct volcano, and it's out in the middle of the plain. You know, there's nothing, and all of a sudden this volcano, it's extinct. It's called Nui Ba Dien Mountain. It's called the Black Virgin Mountain. Very, very well known today. In fact, today it's a tourist attraction. You got a tram going to the top. But in those days, it was, in fact, very significant point in World War II. The Japanese held it, and they used it as a communication center. It's got all these. What we did is we took the entire top, built the most awesome perimeter around the top that you could not penetrate whatsoever, and then put this. And I've got pictures with hundreds of antennas going up. It was a communication center for all over Vietnam. In fact, when I was there, they even said, you want to call home? You can talk to your mom and dad. Anyway, I didn't do it. No.
Hearing a lot of random noises.
Yeah. Anyway, so Nui Ba Dien Mountain, I arrived there, and well, I was excited because it was safe. I could relax. You know, the perimeter was impenetrable. By the way, it was a sacred mountain to the Vietnamese, so we weren't allowed to attack the sides. The sides were a complete complex of tunnels. The Vietnam, they owned it. They owned the mountain except for the top. And they couldn't penetrate the top. We knew that. So I got in the mountain. I was sitting in a mess hall, at a nice little mess hall at the top, real small, sitting there drinking a Coke and relaxing and talking to a sergeant. Says, I'm so glad I'm here. This is because I was told this is the safest place, you know. And he says, whoever told you that? And I said, well, that's what I was told. He says, this place is anything but safe. And then he told me the horrific story, which I memorized. He said, he gave the dates, May 14th, 1968, which was, interestingly, Israel became a nation May 14th, 1948. This was 68. So 20 years to the day, the Viet Cong chose to try to take this top. And he said, we considered no way they could do it. But what they did is they wait for a foggy night. And the fog rolls in, and he told me, when the fog rolls in, it's so thick you can't even see your hand. It's so thick. But they will wait for that. But still, they got to get through the perimeter. So they picked the night of the deep fog, but they did something we didn't expect, and that is they became moles. They tunneled up underneath, and they've been doing this for a long time, so they could know that where to pop up. And they waited for that night, and then we had 99 men on the top, and they killed 22 of our 99, and it was a massacre all night long, and a lot of Viet Cong were killed, a lot of NBA or whatever they were. They were killed, many of them, and we lost 22. No one could rescue anybody because of the fog. Helicopters can't come in. You got to wait through the night. And he said, so that's what happened then, and ever since then, we have re-fortified the perimeter, but we are doing everything we can. But if they attack, it's going to be a foggy night. So that's when the spookiness came in, because that night I experienced fog like I've never experienced in my life. And I was on the perimeter in a small bunker, and inside the bunker, I did a painting of that scene for my Vietnam experience, and it's a very moody, you're kind of underground, there's one light bulb shining, guys were just waiting out the night, you know, one guy playing a guitar, but you never know what's going on. So I was in that bunker, made a sketch of that bunker, by the way, and so in the middle of the night, I decided to go outside and see what it was like. So I got through the opening, and the fog was there so thick, just like they said, it comes in, it's like thicker than anything you see. So you could hardly see your hand in front of you. So that's when I began to fear like I've never, almost as much as the other place, but they didn't take it that night. But the fear I felt was there all night long. And then I excited to get out the next day. So I was only there one day, one night. But that was fear. I say that all to say that, and like I said, it really helped me to start my prayer life. I became a prayer warrior then, you know. I was in two militaries. I was in the U.S. military and also was in God's military, which is a war too, you know. Spiritual war, two kingdoms battling each other. So that's another story in itself. But anyway, that was that last week in Vietnam, and then I just remember that wonderful day of leaving. The day I arrived at Vietnam, getting out of the aircraft, the first thing I noticed was the stench, you know. There was a stench in the air. It was a smell of, you know, no sewage, nothing. It was just really smelled. And it was dusty, but humid. And as we got off the plane, the guys that had been there for 365 days, which was they're up, man, they're leaving. And so they're all dressed in their, you know, they're getting out of their uniforms, and we're getting off, and they started mocking us. And, you know, saying, oh, you poor, they call us cherries. You know, I say, you poor cherries, you're here, you're going to be here for a year, don't you know how right? Now, what kind of a thing is that? I mean, we're supposed to be united, and we're supposed to be patriotic, fighting the same, but they weren't. The attitude of these guys was, this is a feudal war. We've done our year, now you're going to take over. We're done with this feudal mess. There was a basic attitude of, why are we here, you know? I think they're, like I said, I feel like they were patriots, but there was futility. Seemed like there was no, and then my friend Bill Peters, who has written a book called First Force Recon, he was I mean, his book is riveting. In fact, one general said to him, every high school kid in America needs to read your book. It's a riveting story of where his assignment was to go deep into enemy-controlled territory for the purpose of capturing an enemy officer, which he did, but not without peril. But his story, just you feel on the edge of your seat as what these guys, there was I think 6 or 7 of them, remained friends for life. And they bonded so closely together that even though the war was not popular back here and a lot of arguing, their particular unit was so close to each other and so close to the high command that it was like a war within a war. You know, they were in a bubble of an attitude of, we're going to take care of one another. I don't care what's going on in the protesting back home. We're going to be soldiers like we're supposed to be. Very, by the way, he's a pastor today, and
in San Diego, right?
No, San Diego's where we met. Mm-hmm. But he's a pastor in Simi Valley, and we're staying very connected because he's been working on a movie project for 35, 40 years. And I helped spice up his script in the 80s and did a lot of artwork for his script, in which he's progressed to the point where it's going to get made. It's a long story, I won't get into, but we also did our own script, which is 22 years in the making, and we work with different companies. But our story is based on my book, but it's no longer based on my book. It's more like it's a fantasy Vietnam story. It's an allegory about forgiveness. Our story, if you could give it one thing, it's you know, every story has a log line, which tells you the whole story in one sentence without telling the whole story and giving it away. But our log line is, a troubled artist is forced to confront his tragic past in the haunted jungles of war-torn 1969 Vietnam. So that gets you wondering, how could this play out as a forgiveness story? But the writer, Ken, is a super writer. He went to UCLA Film School, and his professor said, you're the best character writer I've ever come across. Well, he has characters in this thing that are so rich. And a lot of the characters were really, you know, true to life in our story. So that's that. And I'm excited because I get up every day thinking, man, I'll be 79 in another couple of months. And I'm thinking, I have a destiny, I'm not bored. I'm excited. I have something to shoot for, because what I want to do, if you want to ask me what I like to do, I want to be an influence. I consider, as a Christian, I'm supposed to be an influence out there, and I'm supposed to take some territory. And there's a famous book or concept that came out in the 50s called the 7 Mountains of Influence. The guy that started Campus Crusade for Christ came up with this, Bill Bright. But church is supposed to get out of the pews, go there and influence the culture in government, and you've got the legal system, you've got the education system, you've got media, the arts and entertainment. And I guess there's one more, the family. But we're supposed to not just retreat, but we're supposed to advance and take ground. So my area is the arts. And I want to be an influence in the arts. And my dad was an artist. Well, he was an actor in Canada. So he acted with Lauren Green and the Bonanza guy, and also with Alan Young, the Talking Horse guy. And my dad was an actor. We came to California at 40 so he could be in the movies, which he was picked for Home of the Brave after the Scouts spotted him in his acting in Santa Barbara. But the part was taken away and given to Lloyd Bridges at the last second. So my dad, he jokingly used to turn off Sea Hunt every time I'd watch it as a kid, because that was Lloyd Bridges playing the lead in Sea Hunt. But my dad was jovial about it, but his dream was dashed because he wanted to see his fulfillment. But instead, he put his whole life into his family, which is me, my mother and sister. But he acted on stage even as I grew up, but his dream was never met. But I have a vision to go in there and be part of the arts, which is not, and if I get involved in this movie making, that's kind of taking off where he left off. So that's a dream that I'm shooting for. I'm dreaming of, right now I go to high schools, museums, different venues, churches to give my story. I have a PowerPoint where I present my whole, in about 40 minutes I tell the whole, with the paintings, with the photos, and then I tell the history of combat art. And it becomes a very exciting presentation, and it's very well received, so it seems like there's no end to the amount of venues, things I'm being called in and asked. Even universities, supposed to do something at UCI in the fall with the Vietnam class. So I'm just like, it's almost like, what do I do next? There's so many things hitting me. But I want to, I'm very excited about this Heroes Hall, and they do various military experiences. Mine happens to be a combat artist, so in 2023 of August, we're supposed to do a show with my art, and very excited about that. And in fact, I'm working on paintings right now, and I've got about 70 of them. I'm a crazed artist, but anyway, I can't stop it. I love doing it. So I want to be able to do a show that presents the best of what I can put forth. Plus, the ones I did in Vietnam itself will be part of that, but they're obviously not the originals. But I have a really sneaky way of, I have a good friend that actually gets them put on canvas, and you can't tell the difference, So we'll have I'm going to put about 5 of those into the show that were done in Vietnam and Hawaii. And so that'll be exciting. And then drawings, I probably have several hundred drawings. We got to figure out a way to frame those. But I'm looking forward to my art expression reaching out, and people can see what I went through visually through the art, and hopefully pick up on the emotions that I try to depict in the art itself. And I try to, this is what I'm doing, because somebody asked me, what is art? What is good art? Or what is it? And I was asked this when I first became a teacher. They said, at Villa Park High School I became a teacher, but they asked me, what is art? What is good art? And so I thought for a second, I thought, it's 2 things. It's the art elements, rhythm, balance, repetition, variation, contrast. There's several of them. but you got to have them all working together. You can't have imbalance. If you don't have repetition, you got to have repetition and you got to have variation, both of them together. If you don't have those, and the balance is really important. I've done paintings where there's no balance. Everything's off here and there's nothing to balance it. So you've got to have that. So you got to have that, but then there's something else. You got to have mystery and beauty. Mystery and beauty is what it is. The beauty through the art elements, and the mystery is the thing you can't put your finger on, but it shows what you're trying to say in the emotional realm.
And that's an interesting observation, Ed, because Vietnam is known as the first televised war.
Yeah.
The first televised war in your home. So people are starting to get an image of Vietnam just by what they're seeing on TV. So your interpretation and your viewpoint, specifically through art of that conflict, is fairly unique. So I guess one of my questions for you would be is, how do you feel your art represents the history of the Vietnam conflict in comparison to other mediums like photography, film, and stuff like that? How do you perceive your medium to have an impact similar, or if not more, to those others?
That's a good question. Because when I took, because I took hundreds of pictures over there, so that's also almost a show of pictures, that I could have. And I look at the pictures, I think, wow, they tell a lot, and there's nothing like good photography to represent something. But then you can move a step forward, and then you get a personal interpretation of that, and you can take one scene, and if you can put a good composition to it and have the art elements all working and just impact, it's like, I like to shock people. And you can do that with a good photo, but with a painting, if you do it right, you take some of the Rembrandts or Van Gogh or Winslow Homer, and you can tell that what they were thinking, that they wanted to impact people. They wanted to, I don't know, if you look at Winslow Homer, he knows exactly what he's doing. He doesn't put too much in the painting. He simplifies things. See, in photograph, you're limited because you get what's there. But in painting, you can say, hey, that needs to be rubbed out because that's not going to say what I want to say exactly. So in painting, you can manipulate using your medium and your art elements, of course, mixed in. And you just have this feeling as you're painting that you're capturing something that will affect people. I want to grab people, My paintings are not, that's why I do them big, because I want them to shock people. I guess the shock element is I learned that from going to museums, and when I went to USC, I went to see the Van Gogh show in the 70s. It blew me away because everything I could see about him is shock, and powerful colors and compositions that are just unbelievable. And so that's what I like. I like to capture something that, I guess I admire these artists so much, these great artists, that I think if I could just do something any close to making something good like that, and by the way, sometimes I get discouraged when I'm painting because it's just like, oh my God, it's not doing it, I'm not cutting it.
But you touched upon something earlier on a great distinction between a photograph and painting.
Yeah.
And that's being able to exaggerate certain elements within that painting.
Yeah, exactly.
That exaggeration infers some kind of emotional context from that scene.
You pull it out.
Exactly. Yeah. The photo can't really do that outside if you're actually capturing that specific moment. But if you engorge someone's eyes, showing 1,000-yard stare, but all of a sudden it's almost whiting out the entire photo.
That's right.
It just shows how much he's trying to take in and just how overwhelming that scene can be. And art is very powerful because before photography in the 19th century, it was one of the only mediums that being able to tell a story. And so for you, being a combat artist, what would you say is probably one of the most profound impacts from your service in Vietnam on your art?
I was just thinking back. I really got excited when we had a show in Hawaii of our art, and a lot of the military people came to see it. And that was a wonderful time. You know what, I just say this. What really exhilarates me is when high school kids come and see this stuff and they hear the presentation that I give. And I watch most, you know how high school kids can be bored real quick? And I like to have fun because I like to see them, every one of them, like their eyes are glued, and I like to see them sitting there stunned, and I just grab their attention. I like to grab their attention so they can hear what I have to say, but they can also see what I felt. And so there's something about imparting something to the people that are listening that makes me want to move ahead with it. You know, makes me excited. You like to stir the emotions. There's something about, like a good movie, a guy that writes a good script, you want to stir the emotions. If it's boring, forget it, you know. You got to have, and I've learned something from screenplay writing, and I'm not a screenplay writer, but my friend Ken, who is a master screenplay writer, I learned you got to have, it's like a painting, you know. Of course, painting's locked in time. It's locked in, but it's like music, a script, you know, as it moves ahead, you know, and and then when you see a movie, you're seeing something for 2 hours or whatever that's telling a story that you got to have it together with the first, second, and third act. You got to build the thing up with the first act. You got to bring it through the second to kind of explain the story, and then the conclusion is pulling it all together and making your point, you know, in the end. So I learned all that from watching Ken, and like I said, he's a master. He entered our screenplay in the largest screenplay competition in the world, 7,300 entries, and then it was called the Nichols Fellowship. But he got a letter back saying that somebody had read it and just want to let him know, even though you didn't win, we were really impressed you made it to the top 100 out of 7,300, and missed it by a thin margin. You missed the top 100 by a thin margin. So that was like a big thumbs up. But I can't wait. We worked with Birchwood Pictures for about 7 years. That's in Orange, city of Orange. They do faith-based films, but they were excited with the whole idea of a combat artist story. They really were excited about that. And they read my book and they thought, but then they came to us, and, you know, Larry Frenzel is the owner, and he's done a lot of films, by the way, but he said, you know what, you got to find the story. You're not, you know, this is like, you're not getting it. People are not going to buy it. You got to find what you're trying to say. And so Ken and I went back to the drawing board, and Ken finally looked at me one day. He says, well, what do you want the story to be about? Without a heartbeat, I said, I want it to be about forgiveness. Well, that was the key to the whole making it work story. That's why he entered that competition and did so high, because he captured that forgiveness message in such a masterful way. I'm blown away. We won't let anybody read it now because we learned just to keep it to ourselves. But in fact, interesting that we were talking about this today. I don't know what the date is, but he texted me this morning and said, I'm sending you the final copy of what we're going to do today. So that's all the 20, I've got stacks of copies of Revisionist.
You mentioned you started this almost 2 decades ago. So.
We started it right after the 9/11 attack.
Yeah.
So, right before the 9/11 attack, we started writing it. So it's progressed. I've learned, you know, and learned what a good script is and what to do. And it's going to be, I can't begin to tell you how this is going to affect people, because it just is such a shocking ending. There's such a surprise. It was nobody who ever figured out. And the whole thing really is two characters, without giving away the story, they start out as friends. They started as acquaintances from little kids. And then they both end up in Vietnam together. And they don't realize that they were together as friends. But one's the villain, kind of, and the other is the good guy, kind of. But it turns out they're both villains because they both won't forgive. And then they're forced to confront their root of bitterness, or they're locked up in unforgiveness. and they're forced to confront this in the setting of Vietnam as they're together. I can't, it's hard to explain all this, but it's just masterfully done, and such a shocking ending and such a satisfying ending. See, in a good screenplay, you got to have they say the greatest, some people say the greatest screenplay ever written was 19 Humphrey Bogart with that movie. Oh my God, I forgot the name of it. Anyway, I'll remember in a second. 1943.
Not Casablanca.
Yeah, Casablanca. I'm sorry.
Okay.
They said that's the greatest screenplay ever written. Some say that because every word, every sentence, every phrase, every scene is all so precisely put together, and it works. So.
And that's kind of like a piece of art where even if you're depicting one scene, you're maybe pulling in from an entire experience from one night, for example, like your experience up in the highlands of Vietnam. And that's going to segue, because right now we're approaching almost an hour and a half. It's going to segue into a final question, at least for this part of the interview.
Yeah.
Because possibly not today, just based on time. Once we start going through your slides, that might start triggering more memories that would then substantiate part of the story that we've talked here today.
Let's do it, yeah.
But what I'd like to ask you, Ed, is you talked about your legacy, but for you being a man not born of this country, being a Canadian citizen, swearing an oath to being an American at Fort Ord before going to Vietnam, today, what does being an American mean to you?
Oh, it means so much. I feel so blessed. And as I grew up, I had no idea how great this nation was. And now, looking back, in fact, my friends and I talk about this all the time now I have one friend that I met him in 1950. I was 7, he was 6, and now we're meeting he lives in Newport Beach, and we get together once a week and go over our childhood experiences. But what was the question again? I forgot.
What does being an American mean to you?
Oh yeah, so it means so much because I believe it is the greatest country on the world, and I think the Constitution, the whole founding, the whole history of it, to me, we had problems, of course, but overall, I mean, who has a Constitution like we do, a Bill of Rights, and all the things, and it's been a country with all its flaws. We've done so much for the world. We've protected the world. Without America, the whole world I think it goes down the tubes. I think we're kind of like the stabilizing force, although there's forces trying to erode it today and take it in a direction that it should never meant to go. But America is so great because, we've sent tremendous aid to countries. We've helped countries. We've tried to feed the poor. We've spread the gospel throughout this, using this country. And plus we've had we really had a prospering country. When you think about it, it's been prospering. And I think God shed his grace on this nation. He put his favor on it. I like the songs, God Bless America, and then a few others that are patriotic. And we should just be blessed to know that we live here because we have the freedoms. We don't have, I don't say we don't have, I think we have tyranny attempting to take us over. But I believe that it will not succeed. I believe we'll be back to really a free country. And I think we're in the midst of a disruption right now that will transform into, I have great optimism. I think God's favor is still on us. We've had our sins, sins of abortion and other things, but his favor is here. I just read in the Bible this morning of how when his favor wasn't with a nation, it was Israel, that he brought tremendous judgment against them. And bottom line, he says, I'm doing this because of one thing, it's because you have idolatry. And I think idolatry is the basic sin of man. And in America, we better watch ourselves because we can't push God out. We've got to put him first. And I think it's so great because we have the freedom to do that. In other countries where there's tyranny, you don't have freedom of speech. You got to mouth what's safe. And we have tremendous this First Amendment is so awesome that we have the freedom to express ourselves without the government tyranny taking us and say, no, you can't say that. That's why I'm so upset about big tech and the media and the distortions that they're doing. I believe we got to get that all straightened out. Once we do, I think we'll be back on the right groove again. But America's, to me, is just growing up in this country in the 40s and 50s was just, it was a beautiful place. And of course, I grew up in California and Newport Beach and Riverside and Corona del Mar. I mean, I've been here since the 60s. And my parents had the foresight to buy down here in the 60s and move down here. And oh my gosh, there's nothing. This is heaven. This is heaven on earth here. But America itself, to me, it is somewhat of a heaven on earth without all the negative stuff. And I base that on the founding fathers and what they gave us safeguards. They put in a lot of safeguards for us being taken over by tyranny. And a lot of forces trying to take that away, though. But I think it's still, we're free still. I pray God we stay free. But it's a great place. I love it.
So that's the end of that segment. Thank you so much, Ed, for that wonderful answer. I'm sorry, I was didn't want to cut you off or anything like that. I felt that what your position is expressed by a lot of fellow Americans as well.
Yeah.
And there's a whole other aspect I want to talk to you about, which is just life in Newport Beach in itself. Gosh, what a tremendous amount of history.
Yeah.
But with that being said, it's pretty much past lunchtime.
Let's quit.
We've been at this for an hour and a half, so this is the conclusion of part 2.
I should have mentioned that I was a conscientious objector at first until I changed my mind.
Actually, I think you did that with the first
Well,
one.
yeah.
Actually, I think